tuned in for the first time and couldn't quite get the audio recording well, hopefully this one works, and we'll send you out the link shortly. So I'm here to introduce myself. My name is Dash, and I'm from Impraise, and I'm a senior marketing manager here. And Zach has kindly offered to join us and show us a bit of his research. And Zach is an analyst from Aberdeen. So Zach, if you wouldn't mind taking over and sharing your thoughts.
Sure, Darshan. Thank you very much. So basically today we're going to look at the difference between engagement and enablement when working with your organization's people to try to drive them to the next level in terms of delivering not just on their own goals inside the organization, but also trying to fit to some of the objectives that the organization has. So for today's agenda, we're going to dive into Aberdeen's research methodology just a little bit, because we're going to be presenting data under the best-in-class methodology for Aberdeen's research. So we just want to give you an idea of what best-in-class actually means. From there, we're going to take a look at what engagement actually looks like today. What is the metric? Is it definable? Is it measurable? And is it enough? Under that sort of guise, we're going to jump right into that next section of, is engagement enough? What does it mean to go beyond it? And then what is the business case for going beyond engagement into this concept of enablement to try to drive people and your goals together in the same direction?
Awesome. All right, let's get straight into it.
So before we get started, I like to start off a little bit with what's in it for you as the listener. Some of the key metrics that you're going to see today in terms of the performance opportunities of going into enablement beyond the engagement track is that employee empowerment and people empowerment yields stronger performance for 92% of organizations that go past the engagement threshold. Structure goals inside organizations along these lines that we'll sort of see as a key theme in the enablement talk track improve revenue potential by 3.9 times. Additionally, two-way communications, which are a cornerstone of getting to enablement, end up decreasing employee turnover likelihood by 19%. And people empowerment ends up improving innovation potential by 16% in terms of organizational likelihood to move into new markets and new service areas, especially when that's being driven by employee initiative as opposed to necessarily coming down by management directive. So let's take a dive into Aberdeen's research to kind of give some of that insight as to where some of this data is coming from. So Aberdeen goes out to market with surveys routinely, at least in human capital management, we're going out about every 2 months with a new survey that takes a look at different areas within the overarching theme of human capital management, with a sort of basic focus always on how employees and people are plugging into the workforce. We pull back the data. We ask about the pressures that end users are feeling in the market. We ask about the actions, which are the strategies they're taking to respond to those pressures, the capabilities, which are the skill sets that allow them to craft those strategies, and then the enablers, which are the technologies that allow them to that support those capabilities in the execution of those strategies. We also ask about operational KPIs like revenue per FTE improvements in quality performance reviews, et cetera, that we then break the data down by where the top performers make up the 20%, and that's our definition of best in class. So when we're talking about the best in class, it's the top growers in revenue opportunity per FTE. It's the top the top improvers in terms of their workforce performance review qualities, elements like that. And we routinely compare the best in class to all others, which is a combination of the industry average and the industry laggards that you see here.
Zach, as a quick question, how large is the pool that you're sampling in terms of splitting that 20, 50, 30 up?
That's a really great question. Our survey sets actually pull back anywhere between about 175 to 350 respondents, sort of on an average range. The employee engagement surveys that we run tend to be one of our biggest grossers in terms of the respondent size, but we're also careful to normalize a lot of the metrics and the demographic data that we ask about to other data sets like the Bureau of Labor Statistics in the event of a U.S. comparison, so that we're making sure that our sample size is commensurate with what we would expect from sort of general demography.
Right. Awesome.
So let's dive right into it. So let's take a look at engagement today and the state of it, what it means to define it, measure it, drive it, and, is that all possible? So one of the top engagement challenges today is that 83% of companies from our data sets, admit that they suffer from low employee and workforce engagement. And this is kind of a problem when we hear a lot of themes around engagement trumpeted, but not a whole lot of definition out there in the market. So what does that 83% really mean? So when we take a look at some of the impacts that organizations are feeling on the road to defining engagement in terms of what it means for its impact on the organization, the first thing is that 69% of companies are tying low engagement to declining productivity. So so this is sort of a two-way street. They're both understanding that, if employees are disengaged, if they're not plugging into organizational goals, if the communication strategy through all of the resources that they're deploying to motivate people to work inside their organization are not, are just not getting people to plug in and put the organization either equally as important as their career goals or above just their career goals for while they're in their job, that productivity in terms of how the organization needs to see it is just not going to happen. At the same time, productivity as a goal is not driving their ability to plug the employee into those goals either. So productivity is not a leading or lagging indicator in terms of engagement inside the organization. It's turning out to be completely separate. Innovation is also lagging. 74% of companies admit that they don't have the right resources to support and motivate the workforce towards real innovation, even though 60% of companies today are prioritizing innovation as a key target for their growth and development. And then finally, low tenure. 64% of companies are finding that lower declining engagement is leading to high and rising turnover. Now, these last two metrics are a bit of an issue because they're lagging in terms of the employer response. So they're metrics that the employer gets to after they've had a negative impact on the organization.
Right.
So without focusing on the motivational factors behind getting people inside the organization to plug into goals for the workforce set by the organization, in terms of these innovation drives, in terms of ideation goals, in terms of rewards campaigns, and anything else that's supposed to lead the employee or and the manager inside the organization on towards achieving goals. These metrics are lagging. They're coming in afterwards, and by that time, it can be too little too late for the manager or the person in charge to revamp the strategy before an employee or a person at a higher level is going to leave the organization.
Yeah. So I guess what you're saying in short is it's much more reactive instead of proactive. They're getting to the data.
Exactly.
Yeah. So exactly as you just suggested, what we're seeing at Impraise is the same. It's pretty startling to think 3 out of 4 people turn up to work every day and they have no idea what they're doing, no clarity, no alignment, and they just kind of are there for the sake of being there and they get paid to be there. I guess it goes without saying that if you know what you're doing and then you feel like you're making an impact, you're having a value add to the business, you increase your productivity. You want to be there. You want to achieve well. You want to work harder. So in our research as well, exactly as you've shown, we're seeing the same stats, and it's pretty crazy to think of the majority of people that turn up every day, this is how they feel.
And I think we've kind of all been there at some point, even in our own careers and our own trajectories. And it's not to generalize for the audience, but at some point or another, if we all look back through our career trajectories, except for maybe the person starting out today, there's been a time when we've lost the motivation or the will to wake up on a Tuesday and go in and do the same work we've always done without any kind of understanding of what is this building towards, what's the relevance of our work to the organization, and is my goal for my career really being reflected in the work I'm doing? So along those lines, let's kind of dive into, is routine sort of spot-defined engagement enough to be just driving towards plugging your people into the organization in a wholly valuable way?
Yeah.
So when we take a look at the limitations of engagement, that definition or that lack thereof is a really, really strong issue. So best-in-class companies today are 30% more likely to track and manage engagement as a core KPI. And this is kind of an issue because 73% of companies are still finding that people are disengaging with time. And basically what that means is that they try and define engagement, they try to build and metricize it per what some of the technology solutions they're using are telling them they should be doing. The problem is there is no concrete definition of engagement across every organization. Yeah. So as a potential person working for that organization, I can get accustomed to one version of engagement at my current workplace and then really become disenfranchised from the workplace for one reason or another because that definition just isn't working out. And I can end up at another place of work and find out that I have to adapt to a whole new definition because the employer is telling me how I should be plugging into their workforce without really listening to me to understand how I want to bring my best self to the work environment and how those two things mesh together to develop what my motivators are, which really is your core KPI of instantaneous engagement, and as we'll see going forward, what that means for enablement as the future projector, the velocity of engagement.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're totally right. Like, how are you meant to, what is engagement and how do you track it? So from an Impraise standpoint, what we're trying to do is help businesses break that down into metrics so you can actually put that against something. And the three pillars that we try to do that through is by decreasing business costs, increasing productivity, and increasing retention. So we need to really shift the needle from just going, we want you to be engaged, but here's how we're going to track those things. As well as from a personal point of view, individuals want to do well. We're all part of a larger business and a company, so the businesses also need to succeed.
And that's really a good point, Darsh. And I think you guys are taking a very good tack to again focus on the drivers. What should a business be looking at to know if they're getting this kind of holistic concept right, instead of focusing on the concept itself and saying we need to acutely know what every little thing means. You're looking for indicators as to whether or not this person inside the organization needs a face-to-face conversation today because they're at risk of dropping off. We have a means now to identify the risk as opposed to identifying, making it all about this person is doing something wrong for us.
Yeah, absolutely.
So along these lines, let's jump into the beyond. Let's take a look at what it means to go beyond engagement, to define enablement a little bit more as this moving target, and look at some of the metrics under the hood. So taking a look at why people join and stay with the company. The goals inside the organization for a lot of people are really what is strategically plugging them into the organization. So they want to know that their work is relevant to the organization. They want to know that there's a sort of rewards and incentive strategy along the way that's going to communicate some of the sub goals as they're building their career track inside the company. And they want to know that there is a career track, something that they can see, visualize, and define, and that it's backed by real salary growth and strong manager workplace relationships. Ultimately, they want to know that the organization is committed to the development of best practices along the lines of building the relationship between all of the employees in a way that's encouraging and that's motivating and that puts management and the workforce on the same side of the table in terms of resolving problems. Because fundamentally it is about matching that career track for the employee with the management goals in a way that is going to build a two-way communication stream and make every person inside the organization understand that to achieve the dynamic change they need to see to know that they're getting to the next career level can actually happen inside the organization without them having to leave to go somewhere else to find that dynamic experience.
Yeah, absolutely.
So along these lines, we've talked a lot and hinted a lot at this concept of two-way communications, but it really fundamentally matters. Today, Aberdeen has found that for 67% of companies, retention and performance are significantly enhanced when the roles and goals of the organization are well-defined and communicated. So that's not just speaking to management goals coming down from the top. it speaks to the work, the person's ability inside the organization to communicate their needs, to communicate their goals, their trajectories, even as they change up through the corporate hierarchy, in a way that's going to be recognized and reflected in the set of goals that they're given as they move through the organization quarter to quarter, half year to half year, and year to year. So, if I were to start off inside an organization as a project manager and wanted to rise into a management role, that might be my first generalized goal. So the organization is going to give me the resources and set me up with the people to achieve that. But as I go along, maybe what that management role looks like is going to get more and more acutely defined based on, the courses I'm going through, the interactions I'm having, the relationships I'm developing. And there has to be some way for me to communicate those acute goal definitions back up as I'm going, even as the organization is communicating its goals for me and my tasks through all of the resources that I'm engaging on a daily basis. So goals also need to be mutual. So the best in class are 20% more likely than all others to link rewards and internal incentives to management level goals. So getting back to that communication strategy, really what this means is that best-in-class companies are engaging all of the resources that they have at their disposal, whether it's rewards management for performance pull, whether it's wellness to catch all of the stresses that might take away from employee or workforce performance, or it's just a general recognition and feedback loop that's going to allow me to praise my coworkers, praise my manager, praise my team leader, or it's a feedback channel that is in person or anonymized, but is going to let me comfortably, safely, and productively communicate my concerns for my team, my projects, my goals, in a way that the organization is going to receive, and it's going to send up the flare to my manager or my higher up that, okay, on Tuesday they need to have a conversation with me because something is dropping off and I'm my risk factor for flight might be going up, but it's not at a point yet that, a risk assessment is going to determine me a flight risk. Yeah. So how can we get to these conversations faster? And how can we do it in a productive manner that's not going to jeopardize our internal performance metrics?
Yeah, I really like that point you just make there, Zach. It was the two-way communication is crucial, and it shouldn't just have to come from the top down. It's as important for me to ask, hey, am I doing well? Am I on track for what we're trying to achieve together?
Yeah, and I mean, I can even speak from my own experience that, my current workplace aside, which actually does this very well, but most of the workplaces I've been in before, have rigid hierarchies, even for small organizations. I got that luck of the draw. And at the end of the day, there are workplaces where I have had to pull back, look my manager or even the CEO in the eye at times, and say, I'm closing this door with my account managers. If a deal doesn't move by the end of the week, that's the only time you're allowed in here because your presence in here is top down and it's toxic and it's holding us up. So I can't have you in here. That's never the kind of relationship that you want to foster inside an organization. And with the proper communications channels, that can so successfully be avoided.
Yeah, absolutely.
So today, getting back to kind of that metric analysis and getting a visualization on your data to understand where and how these conversations need to be happening, the best in class are 3.6 times more likely than all others to make performance metrics more accessible and cross-functional. And while this says for managers, it extends to employees and sort of the general population inside the organization as well. Every person should have at their disposal every metric that's being recorded on their general performance. It's sort of fundamental for them to see how the organization is perceiving them, but and sort of how they're fitting into the corporate culture and the corporate metric outlay as defined by the organization. And it's not to say that every employee should be a conformist. I would argue that is detrimental to the whole innovation talk track. Yeah. But they do need to understand that at the end of the day, as the organization grows in size and the manager to people ratio increases, that there is some level of metricization that's going to go on, that not everything can be individualized at the conversational level. So if you want to develop a good relationship, there needs to be some core understanding that as a person inside the organization, I'm going to be metricized, and I need to understand what those metrics mean and how they're being used. Conversely, managers and everybody up at that level in the hierarchy needs to be able to cross-reference every single employee metric so that they're getting a full picture and a contextualized picture on the individual nature of that person's work capacity.
It's so I completely forgot this. At Impraise, to align with what you've just said, in order for everybody to be able to know what they're doing and why they're achieving what they're achieving, we've separated that into 3 pillars. We've got the 3 pillars focusing on driving alignment and clarity in the business. So when you are at work, what is your purpose? What are you achieving as a team? Are you fitting in? Are you doing the right thing? Secondly is, aside from your company growth, personal growth and development is important. You want to grow as a person. You want to develop. You don't want to be static. You don't want to be doing the same thing every day. So how can we make sure that through clarity and alignment, you are also developing as a person and as part of the business? And lastly, the provide recognition. Without recognition and rewards, it feels like what you're doing goes nowhere. You have to feel valued, you have to feel important, you have to feel recognized, and not in necessarily a monetary form. So here is a voucher, you did a good job, but your work has provided value to our customers. As a result, they have now been able to achieve so and so. So these are the way we've defined it at Impraise, and our platform supports all these 3 different categories as well.
And I think it's great to focus on a lot of those categories, because when we talk about empowering people, to kind of back that up a little bit, 69% of companies today are offering fiscal rewards that are tied to immediate performance. So they're not waiting for the quarterly review anymore to produce raises or bonuses. They're focusing on making sure that, performance is being driven at every aggregate stage on the way to achieving that more permanent growth. At the same time, 48% of companies are engaging ideation solutions and innovation management that is plugging in individuals directly into management goals. And these are both serving also as communications platforms, because as the campaigns get developed in each of them, it's a chance for management to convey what the organizational goals are to individuals inside the organization on those individuals' terms, using language they can relate to. And speaking as somebody who's not always the most touchy-feely person when it comes to a lot of these very subjective, rounded concepts inside the organization, like undefined employee engagement, I can honestly say that, having that sense of personal motivation is actually a very valuable thing inside the organization, and it does boil down to how we perform and how we produce. It's not, there is a measurable, sort of quantifiable aspect to this that goes beyond just feeling good where you work.
Absolutely.
So in the spirit of quantifying things, let's take a look at the numbers. So when we take a look at, strong definitions, the best in class are 92% more likely to find that individual performance improvements are leading to greater achievement of management goals and objectives. So when you take the time to focus on individual performance, when you take a look at, the individual's terms and definitions for their success as it connects in with the metric definitions inside the organization, when it fits in with the corporate culture, when it fits in with the goals and how they're communicated for the organization, it pays to make sure that they're aligned successfully and they're communicated effectively, so that you can achieve that strategically strong alignment between the employee's ability to achieve management goals, but also drive their careers inside the organization. Again, getting back to that dynamic change that an average person needs to see to feel that their career is moving forward. And they should be able to do that without a dynamic change of location. Two-way communications, as we've talked about a lot, and I think, Darsh, as you've talked to, as being vital to Impraise's solution as well. The best in class are 35% more likely to focus on communications management in support of two-way communications. And while there is sort of an automated communications management platform element that some of them are using, realistically, there's a bit of automated communications management in every single solution that they're using, whether it's recognition, rewards, campaign planning, innovation, and ideation management. All of the above resources that are campaign-based and focus on bringing teams together, establishing team leaders, and really espousing management goals and letting the employee or manager or really any person inside the organization plug into that goal on their own terms. The two-way communications are fundamental, that all of those platform and communication opportunities communicate the management goals. Yeah. And then the recognition, the feedback loops, and the team record allow the baseline participant to be able to communicate how they plugged into it, but also what went right and what went wrong in terms of what they needed to see happen with it.
Yeah, agreed. And I don't know whether it's always, a lot of people have recurring meetings that are every 2 weeks. We've got our one-to-one meeting, but sometimes it's nicer to have just a regular 5-minute, for example, in Impraise, we have an example of Atlassian where they use a Take 5 and takes a matter of minutes. They just check in, they've set their goals at the start. Both the manager and the individual take the time to do that weekly, and they can both see each other's responses. And only if and when there are some red flags that come up, they need to have the conversation. So it's not necessarily because we have a reoccurring meeting, let's sit down and have this discussion, but here is where I'm going, here's my trajectory, this is what I'm doing on a daily basis, and this is how I feel about it.
And actually, I think that's there's a really strong message in there in the fact that a lot of the solutions that are being used out there and a lot of the functions we've been talking about today can also help managers, team leaders, and group or organizational leaders understand where and when and why that conversation needs to happen. Yeah. So if you're not the biggest fan of doing it on a periodic basis, whether it's weekly, monthly, quarterly, which the further out you go, the more reactive it can get sometimes. Motivating employees and team members and participants and group leaders to have that conversation, is about being able to, again, take it down to their terms. Yeah. And, it's as much about motivating them to be in the conversation as it is motivating them to do and want to do the work that they're setting out to do. So just allowing them to know that they can be a part of the conversation, but then using your performance metrics to understand when that conversation strategically needs to happen means you're going to be optimizing your resources inside your organization a lot more successfully. So in terms of business improvement, the best in class are 2.6 times more likely than all others to see that average tenure is rising past the 5-year mark. In an age where average tenure at organizations overall is shrinking and is now sitting at 1.6 years, that's a pretty significant improvement. Something to consider too is that the average employee payback period is about 2.2 years relative to what it takes to bring them inside the organization. The average organization out there right now is not running in the red on labor because labor is too expensive. They're running in the red because they're not optimizing their resources internally to make sure that the average person in the organization stays beyond the period of investment that it took to get them there in the first place. They focus a lot in getting them to the job, but not a lot in keeping them in the job, and that's a big problem. So the best in class are focusing on a lot of the values, virtues, and features that we're talking about, and they're seeing results in getting past that 5-year mark. That's more than double the payback period. And then on top of that, can we just go back? Because there's one more metric I wanted to highlight. They're 75% more likely along those lines to see revenue per FTE increase, not just in the last 12 months, but this is actually year over year recurring. And a lot of that is because they are actively plugging, their employees into the organizational framework in a way that the people inside the organization want to come to work every day, they want to grow there, and they want to stay there.
Zach, you raised a good point about people that get the job, and then how do you keep them there? Is this something you've seen in terms of scale of a business? Have they gone from a startup to a scale up, and as a result, individuals are feeling like they do not belong because they came into a certain culture, or is it just the businesses aren't recognizing that they need to do more than just hire someone as opposed to make them feel like they belong?
It's a really good question. For people coming into the organizations for medium-sized and enterprise businesses, more often than not, we see that there's a little bit too much of a focus on talent, on candidate engagement, and not enough on employee engagement. So for those organizations, if you're coming into them, you kind of know to expect at this point that it is sort of a mechanical issue in a dissonance between talent acquisition and talent management. In terms of the scalability side, however, organizations get it wrong, as you're right, as the manager to employee ratio increases. Mm-hmm. So this whole startup mentality is I can have a face-to-face conversation with everybody on a daily basis because the numbers aren't that big. They're in my favor, and I can have this really great culture where everybody sees and talks to each other every day. The CEO is approachable. As the organization grows and as it passes that sort of 50 to 75 employee mark, that really starts to dramatically change, and that startup atmosphere becomes harder to preserve. It's kind of like dealing with a teacher as class sizes are growing. Can you really expect them to remember every person's name in a 40 student classroom in the first week of the class when they haven't seen some of these faces ever? It's the same thing inside the workplace. So having some of those feedback channels open in a concentrated and recognizable way that allows the management team to filter and sort some of it, and also allows your average person to be able to connect with other people inside the organization that they might not have otherwise known because they're on the complete opposite side of the house, is very important as the organization grows. Because a lot of organizations try to carry that startup mentality into their SMB phase, and it just does not work on its own.
All right, let's bring it home.
So again, coming back to the core metrics that we wanted you to walk away with today. From a lot of the functions and features to the conversational talk track and motivators that we've talked about, and a lot of the values and virtues that all of the above are supposed to be espousing, the reality is that empowerment from a motivational standpoint goes one step beyond engagement and is yielding the performance improvements, for 92% of organizations. Structure goals in terms of communicating them through the platform mechanics are improving revenue potential by 3.9 times. Two-way communications is a vital cornerstone of this strategy. Are effectively decreasing turnover likelihood by 19%, driving that higher tenure past the 5-year mark. And employee empowerment is improving innovation potential by 16%, in the sense that when people are plugged into your organization, they're much more likely to want to bring their best idea forward to benefit the organization, because the organization is now concretely benefiting them and is invested in their personal success.
Yeah, I really like the way you mentioned just then, Zach, that it's moving from engagement to an enablement, and from that exact reason is why we as Impraise have chosen to go with the People Enablement platform, because we're not about managing people. We don't want to just engage them. We don't want to just track their metrics, but we really want to allow people to feel empowered, enabled, and go off and succeed, whether it's for the personal goals or for the business goals. But we want people to have those two-way conversations, have the feedback loops, and be able to achieve what they want faster and quicker.
Absolutely. And I think it's a really strong message.
Great. Well, thank you so much for your time. And sorry again for everyone who missed the first recording. Hopefully this one works. And if you do have any questions, please don't be afraid to reach out to either myself or Zach, and we're happy to take your questions. Thank you very much. Thanks, Zach.